Chapter 4. Across the road from the hole, Will perched on the stump of a huge oak that, according to Jeff's wife Lily, had fallen victim to a hurricane 40 years ago. Here came the woman from the little derelict sailboat, walking down the road from the marina. She'd surprised him by doing all the work herself, and now she'd cleaned up. She swung along with an athlete's grace, despite the high shoes. By contrast, he was still in the worst clothes he could find, ugly, stained, and his hair still a mess. He was clean, though, and the clothes didn't reek as their appearance suggested they should. It was the look he needed, not the smell. So Carrie was taking his advice. He didn't want her to see him right now, but knew he had no need to hide. She wouldn't notice him. No one ever did. They were all too busy with their lives to consider the down and out among them. Slowing, she scanned the parking lot, then glanced up the road one way, then the other. She came to a stop in front of the hole, and with hands on hips, stared at the ramshackle old mansion. He smiled. He'd had the same reaction when he first saw it, hesitating, wondering if the place would fall down under his weight. That tangle of haphazard garden might hide alligators, snakes, or what have you. And did they serve dishes containing meat other than possum and squirrel? It didn't take her long to recover, so she wasn't the squeamish type. She strode up the walk, swung the screen door open, and went in. A shiny under-the-dust red SUV pulled onto the crunchy gravel of the unpaved lot. Reuben Tull, just the man he'd been hoping to see. Will rephrased that last thought, not hoping, but he would have been very surprised not to see Reuben here. Happy hour was well underway. It was almost 6 o'clock. The poor guy must be dry enough to guzzle the house white by now. A few moments later, Will picked himself up, didn't dust himself off, and sauntered across the road. He stood in the gloom, letting his eyes adjust. He didn't see the lovely Carrie anywhere, but he located Tull by the whine. Odd that such a large, florid man, who actually spoke in a baritone, could make every syllable sound as if it came from the mouth of a spoiled toddler. Out on the deck, Will slouched to the empty bar stool nearest Tull's table. No one took any notice of him. He'd become a fixture in the scene. After a few minutes, he raised a hand and the bartender came over. The staff might not treat him like their best customer, but he was no trouble and always left decent tips. They were fine with him spending his money here. He ordered a cheap beer and commenced his evening of eavesdropping. The conversation on his right was about the latest NFL scandal. He tuned that out. On his left, a couple was discussing her mother's problems now that she was a widow. Behind him, somebody was telling a story about buying a piñata for their kid's birthday and the party dissolving into a rage fest. Dizzy toddlers smacking their friends and crying in frustration. Hilarious. The idiot's laughter finally died away, and he was able to hear what Tull was saying. "Sugar, gotta tell you again, you look like something to eat in that dress. How about you come on back to my place for dessert?" Will was glad he was staring down into his beer bottle because he involuntarily rolled his eyes. This was not the sort of disclosure he was hoping to hear from Tull, though it was the kind he expected. Tull wouldn't open up about business plans and financial dealings to a too young chick he was trying to pick up in a bar. On previous visits, Will had heard whining about local politics and how badly Tull's old money Charleston family treated him. Nothing yet about the planned construction project. He kept hoping, but Will was beginning to agree with Jeff that it might be time to pull the plug and get back to his real life. Had the local activists accomplished their mission? Maybe the rumored project wasn't going to happen after all. The couple on his left got up, and the guy threw money on the bar beside his empty Stella bottle before he followed his wife. Will made sure the bartender wasn't watching, slid his hand across the sticky surface, and pulled the bottle over in front of himself. Collecting a few extra empties allowed him to stay sober, yet appeared to be a complete lush. Movement on his right caught his attention, and he turned to find one of the football fans frowning at him. "Hey, dude didn't drink all his beer," he slurred. "That's stellar. That's some good shit. I ain't letting that go to waste." He tipsily picked up the bottle in question, wiped the mouth of it on his shirt front, and raised it toward his critic. "Cheers," he said, and trying not to cringe, down the last few drops. "The things we do for friends," he thought, as his lips touched some other guy's bottle. His act had the desired result. A look of disgust crossed the guy's face before he turned his back on Will. As he set the bottle down, things got quiet for a moment, and his ears picked up an uncharacteristic accent, a northern voice, talking a little too loud, off in the distance. "No, Lee, you can't, because she'll... trouble." He looked up. He couldn't see the speaker, but it sounded like the fashionista with the junky sailboat. After a second's pause, her crisp voice again cut through the rising southern murmur. "No, Lee, you have to. She'll never agree. Have to do it. Don't let her. Sucks. Hell no. Chained. In that Bugatti? Out of control." Will's eyes were popping at the things Carrie was saying. "I don't know. At the hotel. Completely divorced from reality. Lock her. Telling you... No, hold on. If you want to keep your... Lee, stop. Shit." What an interesting conversation. Will wanted to know more, but chairs began to clatter around him as a new party arrived. Loud greetings were exchanged, and the general din rose again. He didn't hear anything more of Carrie's phone exchange. Instead, he heard Reuben Tull. "Evening, Dick. Thanks for coming, man." His whiny words were punctuated with meaty slaps, someone patting someone else on the back. Dick. Will didn't want to turn around to check, but how many Dicks could there be in this backwater? Could this be Dick Polk? "Hell, son, what are friends for if not to come when called and drink all the beer you buy 'em?" Laughter and more backslaps. "Reuben, this here's Jim Hammer. Like I told you, Jimbo, Reuben is an old friend of the family. His dad and my dad go way back, and we've done a deal or two in the past. As I mentioned, he's a little up against it at this time. We need to see what we can do to help." "Sure enough, Dick. Pleased to meet you, Rube." Reuben muttered a greeting in response, not sounding quite as happy about Jim's presence as Dick did. Will squirmed in his seat, wanting so bad to turn and see what Dick and Jim looked like. Holy shit, this must be his lucky day. This might change everything. Reuben Tull was meeting with Dick Polk, the man Lily hated so much that spit flew out of her mouth when she spoke his name. Will was straining to hear the men behind him. Either the noise level had risen or his ears were failing. He'd missed most of what they'd said for the last few minutes. Then things settled down, and he caught a fragment. "Seen that website?" said Reuben. "Take a look at it when you get home. Nah, it don't work on phones. Looks like shit. Hard to..." A low whistle interrupted him. "Hard is right, boys. Here comes that little beauty again." "Well, hello, darling." Puzzled, Will looked up to see what was going on and saw Carrie coming toward him. He put a slight, welcoming smile on his face, but she passed without noticing him, ignoring the other men's comments. "Well, she's not very friendly," Reuben said. "I prefer the friendly ones, like Gina over there." Out of the corner of his eye, Will saw him raise his glass to the girl he'd been chatting up earlier. "They all get friendly," said the man called Jimbo, given proper motivation. Dick laughed. Reuben grunted. Son, that is exactly what Jim and I are here for. We're going to pull your fat out of the fire and help you build up your pile of motivation. Then you can do chicks like that rather than these heifers who show up at karaoke night to sing about how pleased they are that they have a big bass. Now it was Jim's turn to laugh, and Reuben started whining again, this time about Dick being unkind to his friends. Will wished he could tune him out and think about something more pleasant. After looking into Tull, his status as the family joke, and his string of failed enterprises, Will was stumped. The man seemed to be able to keep his planned project, Palmetto Jelly Balls, moving toward approval in the face of some pretty strong local opposition. Now it all made sense. These guys, not simple goofball Reuben, were the real reason Jeff and Lily were in danger of losing their business. But why would they back such a weird operation? It wasn't at all in their line. The inane chat changed as the waitress greeted them. "Oh, hello, darling. How you doing tonight?" "Yes, I'll have the crab cakes and another one of these." The waitress mumbled a few words. Then Will heard Jim Hammer get loud again. "I'll have, shoot, Dick, check it out. I'll have that right there." Will looked where Hammer was looking and saw Carrie coming back from the direction of the pool table. Her cheeks were very pink. That surprised him. She didn't seem like the type to be bothered by a little coarse talk from a couple of drunk old fools. But it was only 7 o'clock. She'd been here about an hour. Could she already have had that much to drink? Sailors did have a reputation. She walked steadily, though. The unfamiliar heat must be getting to her. "That is an ass I could get behind." "Stick to business here, Jimbo. The girl wants to take your order. Miss, my friend might be interested in the ham." "Hell no, I want a nice round fillet like that one there. Medium rare and another Jameson rocks." Out of the corner of his eye, Will watched Carrie settle into her seat on the other side of the post. He'd noticed her great ass, too. He turned his attention back to the group behind him, expecting to hear nothing more exciting than Reuben's order. Instead, he heard another man joining the party. "Hey there, Seth boy. Haven't seen you in an age. Pull up a seat. I've got some things to tell you. You know Jim?" "Greetings, Mr. Polk. Hello, Mr. Hammer. So nice to see you again. I appreciate the invitation, and on most occasions I would leap at the opportunity to partake of your companionship and sagacity. Tonight, however, I am joining an important new friend." Wearily, Will signaled the bartender for another Bud Light. How long were they going to drag on all this good old boy shit before they got down to business? He couldn't drink more than a couple of beers without losing his edge, and nursing one for hours made the staff impatient. Plus, it was only an hour before he had to leave to meet Jeff. "What, Seth, you mean that little beauty? Well, damn, boy, I'd be aiming to tap that myself if I didn't have business to conduct. Don't stand here jawing with a bunch of old codgers. You got moves to make. Go enjoy yourself. We'll catch up later, and tell your daddy hey from me." Polk was a social animal. He knew everyone in the place and had to talk to each of them. A guy in a pink shirt strutted past. Polk's young friend Seth, no doubt. He sat down at Carrie's table. "Oh, that little beauty." A surge of anger burned every inch of Will's skin. She moved fast. Even so, he did not like the way those sexist fools were talking about her. She might be snooty, citified, and appearance-driven, but that didn't mean they should talk about a woman that way. He should warn Carrie about Pink Shirt. "The papers will arrive tomorrow." "What? What papers?" Shit. He'd let himself get distracted just as they finally launched into an actual topic that might be of interest. He sighed. cast one hopeless glance toward Carrie and Pink Shirt while taking a swig of beer. He had to stay where he was, stay in character. Hearing Reuben and Dick's conversation was far more important in the long run than preserving a party girl's dubious virtue. He couldn't afford to get distracted, couldn't get involved with her in any way or pay any attention to her sexual escapades. Reuben was whining now. Don't know why. We already got the county zoning permit. We turned in all the state permit applications and the DNS forms months ago. I got the temporary experimental permit sitting on my desk right now. No one has told me we needed anything else. I know. These are just some little things Jimbo cooked up. To give us a little more leverage, you might say. Mind you, my name is not mentioned anywhere, and you won't be mentioning my name. As before, I am not, officially, a party to any of this. But our understanding, that stands. There was a threat in Polk's tone. Will glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed it. The tables nearby were full of oblivious revelers, intent on their own hilarious stories, their own harrowing dramas. No one was paying the slightest attention to the potential criminal activity in their midst. As soon as she'd signed off with Kat, Carrie's phone rang. It was Lee, her newest team member. He was alone with Diva and having trouble controlling her. Carrie listened to his story for a moment and then interrupted and told him in no uncertain terms that he had to clamp down on the singer. No, Lee, she'll never agree to that. You have to do it. Don't let her get in any situation like that. Distract her. Hell no. Don't let her put on that costume. And if she does, don't let her outside. Whatever you have to, keep her chained to her desk. I don't know. Tell her the weather report says it's going to rain buckets and there's no underground parking at the hotel. Tell her one of the songs for the new album sucks or something. Whatever it takes. Lock her in that room until it blows over. Wait, stop, Lee, shit! Carrie slammed the phone down on the table. The sound jolted her, and she realized she'd abandoned her usual discretion, lost her cool, yelling at Lee. Glancing around, she saw that no one was paying any attention to her. That outburst hadn't been very professional, but she cut herself some slack. She was on vacation. A couple of hours ago, she'd received the second biggest shock of her life. And, not expecting to have to step in to rectify a situation back at work, her instincts and reactions must be dulled. All around her, people were laughing uncontrollably, waving their arms, leaning on tables, spilling out of their chairs. Sitting here with her pen, notebook, and cell phone, she was a captain of industry by comparison. She downed the last of her drink and looked over her list again. This had been one mother of a day, and it looked as if Diva and Lee were set on making the evening even worse. There was so much to do if she was going to get the boat ready to travel, and now Diva was going off the reservation. She sighed. Nothing to do but wait for the fallout. So she signaled the waiter and ordered another dirty martini. Memories of the last time she'd had to bail her boss out of jail ran through her mind. Lee might have better luck controlling her than Carrie and Oscar. He was attractive, upbeat, and energetic. Diva liked him, perhaps too much. But Carrie couldn't rely on luck. Responsibility for the star's security still ultimately lay with her. By the time her second drink arrived, her gaze had drifted out over the marsh. Keeping her attention there, watching birds, she tried to let go of work concerns. If things got out of hand, Oscar would call and they'd figure out a plan. If it got bad, she'd get the PR crew involved and they would work their miracles. But until then, she was going to chill, distract herself, recharge, and get ready to attack tomorrow's projects. The waiter came around again. In her last sensible decision of the evening, Carrie ordered the house special steak and a glass of water and resumed making her list. After a few minutes, she noticed she was unconsciously trying to wipe something off her fingers. She needed to go wash the salt water and slime ball grime off her hands before she ate. Ignoring rude comments from a few fat old guys wearing too much jewelry, she made her way past the bar and back toward the building to find the restroom. Out on the deck again, and heading back to her table, she was passing the pool table when there was a tap on her arm. "Pardon me, miss." Carrie, who was still trying to banish visions of Diva loose on the streets of New York in a Bugatti, while also planning for the diagnostics and maintenance she'd need to do before trying to start the engine, stopped and oriented. A man in a flaming pink shirt was leaning toward her, a pool cue in his hand. "Am I in the way of your shot?" She hadn't realized she was in the path of the game. She stepped back, but the man leaned his cue against a stool and followed. "I hope you don't mind my observing that you appear to be finding your way around this fine establishment for the very first time." He gave her a lopsided grin. Calculated, she thought, to charm the ladies. "Yes," she said, with a smile to match his. "While I hate to admit it, I am a whole virgin." "Interesting way of putting it," he said, tilting his head and peering at her. "I like it." He was cute, and the attention was not unwelcome, after nothing but aggravation all day. Aside from his sense of humor, he was far from her type. The bright golf shirt, brand new jeans, turquoise loafers, and mussed pretty boy hair all said he cared way too much about looking good. He was the type to agree to go sailing, then fuss that his hair was getting blown around by actual wind, and gripe about salt spray ruining his costas. But she didn't want to alienate anybody in this town, and having just pitched a fit on the dock, thrown a guy in the water, and publicly yelled at one of her staff, she was already several steps off on the wrong foot. She smiled at the charmer. "Excuse me," said one of the players who was trying to line up a difficult shot. Carrie stepped sideways, out of the way of the cue and another body coming around the corner. She brushed up against the wall and put a hand out to steady herself. Her fingertips came back white, and she turned to look at what she'd touched. It was a blackboard with a list of names and numbers. Crap! She'd rubbed against the list of awaiting players and all but wiped out a couple of names. There was chalk on her ass, too. When she tried to brush it away, it only embedded in the fabric of her jeans. She bent over the chalkboard and tried to wipe away the smears in hopes the names would still be legible. "What the fuck are you doing?" A hand grabbed her arm and roughly yanked her back from the board. Whirling into a defensive posture, weight on her back leg, hands crossed, Carrie found herself facing a large, bearded man in motorcycle leathers. "Why the hell do you erase my name?" Carrie relaxed her pose and began to explain that it had been an accident, but there was a very drunk woman in her face. "Bitch, you have no fucking right honing in here and changing the order." "You're absolutely right," Carrie said, doing her best to retreat. "No one wants to play with your skinny ass anyway." A giggle escaped, which Carrie tried to cover with the beginnings of an apology, but the woman grabbed hold of Carrie's tank top and twisted. "You think we're joking? Charlie's name been on that board for an hour. He's up next, and no fancy city bitch is gonna say different." Carrie's automatic response to the assault on her clothing was to kick and send the woman flying. But noting the level of inebriation, and remembering she didn't want any kind of notoriety, she instead grabbed the fabric above and below the woman's hand and jerked. At the same time, she shifted her weight. The woman's fingers released. Off balance and with no support, the woman squeaked and toppled over. "Nice moves," murmured the charmer, who was standing between them and helping the drunk girlfriend to her feet. He seemed to know the couple and somehow diffused the situation. Carrie had no idea how, and was amazed when he dragged her free of the raving lunatic who had finally stopped shouting bitch at her. "Thank you. I don't know how you did that, but I'm grateful." "It was my pleasure and responsibility as a gentleman to step in once the entertainment threatened to escalate into the shedding of actual blood. Hers, if appearances are to be believed." The waiter walked by, carrying a steak dinner and a glass of water. That looks like my dinner," she pointed toward the waiter. "I have to go. Really hungry." She also had to stop displaying ninja skills. That only led to trouble in these situations. "I won't impede you further." Pink Shirt made a sweeping gesture. She nodded to her verbose rescuer, attempted to straighten out her crushed clothing, and escaped.
A few minutes later, Carrie found herself trying to think of a way to get this guy to leave her alone. She saw no reason to be rude to Seth. That was the name he'd given her when he invaded her privacy with his boy-next-door charm. But she didn't want to be hit on either. She had to get the job done and get the boat back home. Plus, she couldn't face the energy drain of a one-nighter who turned into a clingy, entitled baby. Seth had all the earmarks of that type. She smiled across the table, half listening to his self-aggrandizing tale of diving in St. Thomas, while looking over his shoulder. She'd spotted her neighbor at the bar. She should blow this guy off and go join Will. Then no one would bother her.
She turned, ready to pick up her plate, but then she saw Will listing to one side, his head held in an ungainly position. He looked too drunk to be of any help, even as window dressing. And beyond him sat that group of misogynistic jerks who couldn't keep their mouths shut. All three were leering at her as they talked. She hated to stereotype, and she knew her northern biases were showing. But what was it with southern men? Why were they still so clueless? Didn't they watch what happened to their kind in the movies? They should get the hint about the way the rest of the world regarded them. Sighing, she turned back to Seth and smiled. There were worse fates than taking a good-looking guy back to her room for a few hours. At the worst, it would help her blow off some steam. At best, she might even relax and enjoy it. And if he got out of hand once they were alone, she could bust out the moves that so impressed him and direct them his way. The waiter was passing. She stopped him and ordered a third drink. Then she turned back to her flamboyant companion and batted her eyelashes. When he saw Carrie leaving with Seth, Will's guts twisted. The two were laughing, joking about sex, touching each other in provocative ways. Someone shouted, "Get a room," and they responded in the affirmative. Talking to her earlier, he'd got the impression that Carrie was different, and he'd thought she cared about other people. But now he saw that, like Tull and his party, she was oblivious to anything but her own self-interest. And like them, she believed that drunks and lowlifes were beyond caring what other people do or think or say. Like servants waiting on aristocracy back in Downton Abbey days, the underclass might as well be wallpaper, powerless, emotionless, brainless, lifeless. With a wry smile, he noted that he'd been planning to use this fact of human nature to his advantage tonight. Surprise! Used against you. It could hurt. He ordered another beer to take the edge off and refocused on the group behind him. Polk was speaking again, his speech peppered with, "Now, son, shoot, darling, and right, Jimbo," and continuous laughter. The man was a piece of work. Will didn't know why exactly Lily hated Polk. He was obnoxious, but there must be something else. When he'd asked about the obvious animosity, Jeff just shook his head. "She said her family got caught in his web," he said. "It's why they would never be free of his poison." I don't know what she meant. And based on the rest of the conversation, it was not something worth finding out. She said her parents couldn't see past his good old boy town father act, but she'd grown up with him breathing down her neck, and she knew what he was really like. In fact, I said something like, "Give the man a chance," and she said, and this I can quote verbatim, "Jeff, you'd better hear me. Dick Polk is not a man, he's a snake. Stay away from him. You get involved with that lowlife, and our marriage is over." She stalked out of the house, slammed the door, and wouldn't speak to me for the rest of the day.